Welcome to the Wall Street Green Summit, Kevin Wilhelm. Kevin is the CEO of Seattle-based Sustainable Business Consulting and is one of the world's preeminent business consultants in the field of sustainability and climate change. Good morning, Kevin. How are you today? Well, he's on the move.
No, good. My mouse fell out of my hand as I was hitting unmute, so thank you. Thanks for having me,
Okay.
Paul. I appreciate it.
Sure. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you.
Tell us what you're focusing on as the CEO of a sustainability business-based consulting business. I know you submitted several thoughts to us that we might want to consider. And one of the first ones that we want to look at while you're with us today is how you're seeing clients change or adapt based upon the rules that the SEC is providing, and that we're going to be, as Misha was saying, we're in this comment period for now for 60 days or so. And what is that going to do to the process of investment engagement? And from my perspective as a former financial advisor, how are advisors going to be affected by these new rules?
Well, first of all, Paul, thanks. That's a great question. I'll give a little context about what we do. So, Sustainable Business Consulting, we've worked with about 240 different clients across 37 industries. So, the majority of our work is with Fortune 500 multinationals, but we also do a lot of work with private equity firms, investment firms, banks, financial institutions. And to your question about what's the SEC done to kind of that marketplace, for so many of our clients, whether they are on the investment side or they're on the company side, there has been you've had leaders, that have signed on to things like the Amazon Climate Pledge, the Walmart's thesis, responding to the Microsoft's Climate Pledge, or, trying to get ahead of what BlackRock, State Street, and Bloomberg have been putting out about everyone should be reporting to TCFD. But there was always this conversation that was happening in boardrooms that we were hearing with the executive teams at many of the multinationals, especially those based here in the United States, that there was this, well, what's the SEC going to do? Do we need to get in front of it? What we need to do? And I think the fact that just that a rule is put out, even though that there's still the comment period, as you mentioned, of 60 days, has really been that stick that's been really needed for a long time. What we're seeing from the investment side is so much of the focus is on climate. But as organizations are wrestling with climate, and as so much of the conversation and questions, whether it's through CDP, SASB, TCFD, the GRI, they're all asking broader ESG questions. And so really what it's done is the SEC guideline on climate, especially, focusing on scope 1, scope 2, and encouraging people to get into scope 3, is it's focused firms to up their game in terms of their knowledge base on ESG broadly, to not only look at, just the environmental side, but be looking at that linkage between the social and the governance component to it. And from the financial advisors' perspective, the firms that we've been working with, again, there had always been this belief, this kind of, well, we've heard that social responsible investing is better. We know that the funds that perform on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index outperform those in the Dow, but they truly didn't believe it. And this ruling has kind of forced a lot of the advisors, just on the 5 days since it's been out, to have been coming to us saying, okay, now truly educate us about what this is. How do we really get in there? So the implications of the SEC rule from a North American perspective have been huge.
Okay, so tell us now, in your engagement with clients, in what ways you as a consultant and as a teacher at Harvard and a thought leader in this industry, how are you adjusting to these changes? It's
Sure.
got to be impacting your business model as well as everyone else's, right?
Yeah. Well, certainly, I would say this has been, I would say this has been a little accelerant that's been, kind of thrown onto the fire, for lack of a better analogy. so many of our organizations have been coming to us, and really over the last, I mean, we've been around for 17 years, but over the last 18 months to 2 years, the uptick in interest, I mean, certainly on the social side, what happened in the summer of 2020 with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor really forced so many organizations to up their game and kind of diversity, equity, inclusion. Over the last 6 months, you know, the battle for talent has become not just a hypothetical, but it's truly happening at an unprecedented space. And so companies are doubling down on their ESG efforts because they know they need to not only retain their talent, but attract it. In the environment space, you know, a lot of the money has been talking. You know, for years, I'll just give an example. Microsoft's got 100,000 suppliers, and you know, for the last 5 years, they've asked organizations to report on their climate progress through one of 5 different, you know, alphabet soup reporting agencies. Well, last year they said, nope, you need to report to CDP, you need to score well, you not only need to report, but you need to show progress. And by the end of 2021, we need to see a climate strategy. And so it really went from nice to have and trying to just barely comply just enough to actually putting, you know, having companies have their feet held to the fire, so to speak. And then on the governance side, you know, that's always been kind of the middle child that didn't get enough attention, you know, asking executives or boards of directors to commit to having ESG criteria into not only board selection, but evaluation and compensation structures was always seen as a third rail, you know, that's impossible to get to. But with the efforts that that BlackRock, you know, put in there in terms of TCFD and SASB with those requirements, we're really seeing organizations now wrestle with those conversations at not only executive but at the board level. And so, so those are some of the changes that we've really seen over the last few, you know, I would say the last 18 months. And this SEC guideline that came out last Monday really will cement it and be the accelerant that's going to make it happen even further for companies, whether on the investment side or just on the regular business side.
Okay, so Kevin, we had a question come in from our audience, which I'm going to ask you to address, and that is, as the SEC is looking at ESG and SRI monikers, have they looked at certifications, and do we know whether they are scrutinizing titles like the CSRIC, which is the Chartered SRI Counselor program? Do you know if they're working on those things at the same time?
I don't know specifically if they're working on that one, on the CSRIC. I do know that one of the things that's already been showing up in the comment period is that businesses are feeling like enough of this alphabet soup that we have to all reply to on ESG. We need one framework. And so I don't know if they're looking at certifications, but it's why you're seeing consolidation. It's why you're seeing groups like CDP and GRI collaborate, SASB and TCFD collaborate, you know, the IIRC and SASB collaborating, because you know, as some of our outdoor retail clients have mentioned to us, they can have full-time people that are just responding to ESG questionnaires every single day, and they're getting a different one from a customer, from an investor, from a third-party verifier, certifier. And we've been working with a lot of our organizations, a lot of our clients, on kind of developing that strategy of how do you get your master answer key, so to speak, on ESG issues that will satisfy SEC guidelines. They'll satisfy the investor guidelines, whether it's external reporting ones like TCFD or SASB or GRI, CDP, or if there's some of the rating agencies, whether that's MSCI, EcoVadis, ISS, GRASB, you know, any number of those, to one kind of master sheet. And because, you know, everyone's tried to play the game in the ESG space too cute. You know, everyone's got their own questions. No one wants to use the same ones. Bloomberg didn't want to use the ones that State Street had for years. And now they realize, wow, it'd be a lot easier and we get a lot better data if we just ask the same questions the same way using the same words. And you know, that's been important. And I just saw Linda's question that popped up in the chat about what the S means. You know, in terms of the social side of kind of ESG, so much of it, kind of historically had always been on, what are you doing in terms of your community, your philanthropy? What are you, giving back to groups? But now that organizations have really, and especially it's been driven by millennials and Gen Z, looking at the societal impacts of DEI and the battle for talent, organizations are realizing that while it's great to get ahead on the environment, that they really need to focus on this S component hard and fast, because again, we're seeing a lot of organizations that made great, bold commitments 2 summers ago. Hey, we're going to incorporate DEI into everything we do. We're going to hire a DEI officer. And they did a little bit of work. They did some training. They did a lot of internal, lunch and learns and education series. And then the actual money flowing into the DEI communities has not happened. And so organizations right now are really having to look themselves in the mirror going, okay, just like they were on climate, where they were just trying to check the box just enough so they wouldn't get in trouble. They're realizing that they have to, if they're going to make an effort on DEI, this is one where their employees are going to be holding them accountable and saying, are you really doing enough on DEI, or are you just playing lip service? And I think that's a big important thing.
Yes, Kevin, I just posted a podcast program today with Olivia Knight of As You Sow, and they have a whole process where they analyze they're analyzing racial justice and DEI metrics across the Russell 1000 companies now on an annual basis and scoring them. And so again, it's another kind of resource that's out there. So one of the things that we've promised our audience we're going to deliver today is the information on ESG Mega Trends. So where are we going, Kevin, in the industry with ESG Mega Trends? And let's have you speak to the big picture, where we see all the dominant players that we know by name, but also, of course, there are many thousands of smaller players and businesses out there as well. And whether by name or not, give us an example of what you see developing there.
Well, I think the mega trend is that right now we're in a spot, I would liken it to kind of the mid-90s, when organizations had their business strategy and then they were coming out with their e-business strategy or their web-based strategy. And then within 4 to 5 years, you didn't hear that term anymore, because it just became, it was part of your business. And that was the way business was done, was, through the web and through e-business. I think that's the mega trend of where kind of the ESG programs are headed. I would say the awakening isn't there yet, but I would say the mega trend within the next 2 to 5 years is that ESG isn't going to be a way of doing business. It's going to be the way of doing business. And organizations that can't figure out how it's aligned, how it's integrated, are going to be left behind, because quite honestly, it's pretty obvious probably for most of the people here on this, not only in this panel, but in this audience, that we're seeing it with our clients, at SBC. What we've been able to do is we've been able to, when we launch an ESG program with them, we're not only finding them cost savings, but we're finding them new top line revenue generating opportunities. It's reducing their risks. It's helping them with their business resiliency and addressing some of the supply chain issues that Paul and Peter mentioned earlier. And also, really importantly, on the battle for talent and DEI. And so I think at the mega trend level, that's where it's headed. I think what you're saying about the kind of what smaller organizations are facing, not the the big companies. I think for smaller organizations, they're trying to figure out how can I play and have an impact. We see mid-size and even smaller organizations that their default used to be, well, we don't really push the market enough to actually make a difference, but they can. And or they how can we solve racial justice just ourselves? And what I think has been the kind of mega trend in that is that organizations now, they want to do their part, and so they're looking for ways to do that. And whether that's pushing it through different industry associations they're part of, or just having a greater impact in local communities, we're seeing lots of what I would say, when I say, small and medium-sized businesses, I'm talking down to the very small business level, all the way to, the kind of $20 billion below type organization, that they've realized that kind of that micro targeting of community action, so how do we engage with our communities, not just in philanthropy, but how does our philanthropy reflect our DEI efforts? How does our philanthropy and our volunteerism affect our climate efforts? And we're starting to see that as kind of a mega trend, is that the organizations are starting to see the alignment that they need to have, that they can have with it, not only from their philanthropic side, but more importantly from their purchasing side. There was an analysis done by Pew Charitable Trust, and it said that, for every $100 you spend, 97% of that is in your procurement, and 3% is in your philanthropy. And so one thing that we've been really focusing with our organizations is to help them understand how they can align their purchasing, their spend habits to affect not only their climate goals, but their diversity, equity, inclusion goals, and their governance goals.
This guy's
Okay.
calling me an idiot. Hey, you idiots, where are my tickets? I think that's extremely rude.
Peter,
Peter, you're on. You're not
on.
You're not muted.
You're not muted. Okay, so Kevin, we have another question that's come in from our audience, and it's related to greenwashing. And I'm surprised it's taken the first question about greenwashing this long to surface today. But we know that it's a problem across the industry. We know that it's an issue for investors, for financial advisors, for companies themselves, because they don't want to be accused of greenwashing, especially with new SEC regs coming out about their comportment and their practices. So tell us what you engage around with your clients related to the potential for greenwashing on either side of the table, if you will, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I really appreciate the anonymous person who put that in the chat. Yeah, when organizations hire these quote unquote greenwashing experts, it's no similar than the old term, you're trying to throw lipstick on a pig. But really, this is what I think is the last bit of desperation. It's organizations that know they need to massively change, but are doing everything they possibly can to not do that. And I think what the difference is in the last 2 to 3 years, the number of sophisticated ESG professionals, not just at the investment houses, not just in the rating agencies, but more broadly, they're not going to allow that to go forward. And while a fossil fuel company like Peabody or Rio Tinto may try and quote get away with some greenwashing to stay, I think they're going to be called out more and more and more in a way that they don't expect. They might have expected, okay, if I go to Green Biz, or if I go to Sustainable Brands, or if I attend this Wall Street Green Summit, that the experts may call me out, but the broader populace would not. I think that's changing. It's changing extremely fast, and I think social media has played a big part of it. We actually got approached just recently about it by a coal mine in Alabama that was trying to say, well, we want to add our sustainability to this, and we kept saying, yes, what you can do, you can transition to offering renewable energy jobs in this community, and if that's what you really want to do, use the money that you currently have and your assets to build for the future and to provide for the community of the future. And I wrote a book on this called How to Talk to the Other Side. And one of the things that we did when we did our research was when we went to the coal communities of Appalachia, coal became the thing that everyone was focused on. But really what these communities wanted was they wanted their old communities back. They wanted jobs. They didn't want crime. They didn't want drug abuse. They saw a smaller and smaller tax base. And so this is impacting their way of life. And the more we kind of peel back the onion, they didn't care whether the jobs were in coal or renewable energy, but that was the choice that they were being given. And so once we started talking to them about, here's another path forward that's not only clean for the environment, but would better for your community over the long term, and for the health of, you know, your loved ones that were going in and out of these mines. The conversation shifted very quickly, but too often as environmentalists, it's put from a very white middle class or upper class perspective of, don't you see the planet is dying, you know, you got to get off coal, as opposed to how can we help you in these very specific areas to really meet what you want with your lives. And, you know, the greener, cleaner way is a way of doing that.
Okay. Now we've had one more question come in, Kevin, if you see it on the screen from Marwa Kamal, I guess. And this is about how, again, back to the idea of small companies. How can they participate in ways, even if it's, for example, a local restaurant that's composting its waste in a sustainability focused way? What kind of dynamics can that add to the production and the growth of a business, even a small business, over time?
Yeah, well, with a small business, you know, there's the bottom line savings and there's the top line revenue growth. And too often, I think, as consultants, you know, people come in and they say, okay, well, what can we do to use your example, Paul, of the restaurant? Say you're small, you own a few small restaurants in one city. You know, what are the things we can do? Okay, well, let's go in and you know, take advantage of the local and utility incentives to change out our light bulbs and our water fixtures and all those things which everyone knows about. Or here in Seattle, if you shift your waste from to compost from trash, you can actually save about 18% on your overall weight cost, because things like coffee ground and wet food is really heavy composed to, you know, compared to other forms of waste. But that just kind of scratches the surface, where we usually tend to go in and say, yes, let's help you do all that. And we do this with big companies as well. Where are the opportunities for growth? And so when we, you know, hit local restaurants here, we ask them, hey, what big companies are looking to change their procurement policies to have a more inclusive or diverse portfolio? So instead of hiring big catering companies, can they be reaching out to the local small, you know, Indian or Chinese restaurants or Mexican restaurant that can come to them, that can provide them meals or catering services in a way that will not only meet that client need, but help them open up a whole new service and growth industry to their business. And so that's the type of thinking that I think organizations really need to be thinking about, is, you know, not only where can I, you know, save and cut back, but what are the assets that I have that I could really bring to another organization and who needs them? And I think right now, one of the things that we're doing with Sustainable Business Consulting is we're helping a lot of these big firms that are trying to tackle their climate, you know, pledges and their DEI commitments. And some of it is just changing their procurement thought process. And it is more difficult. Like, it's easier for people just to buy stuff off Amazon or buy their products through Corporate Express than through a local you know, organization. But you're saying, what the impact we want to have, and how can we use our dollars here to really help us meet our commitments? And when you start having those conversations, the light bulb kind of goes off, and the creative juice is flowing, where marketing gets involved, community gets involved, the CFO gets involved, the purchasing department gets involved, and you start seeing an accelerant where, by leveraging these decisions around environment, social, and governance all together, you can accomplish your goals in a way that not only save money, but that can further advance your ESG goals and objectives.
Kevin, thank you so much for your time today. We're going to move on in our program. There are several questions that came in late in our conversation, so if you don't mind addressing those offline, I would really appreciate it. Thanks very much again to Kevin Wilhelm. He's the CEO of Seattle-based Sustainable Business Consulting and one of the world's preeminent business consultants in the field of sustainability and climate change. Enjoy the rest of your day, Kevin.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Okay.